The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the dense forest as a group of teenage Boy Scouts made their way along a narrow trail. The air smelled fresh, filled with the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Laughter echoed through the trees as the boys joked about who would be the first to get lost or accidentally step in mud. Despite their playful banter, there was an undeniable excitement buzzing among them. They were on an adventure far from the distractions of school, homework, and home. Leading the group was Mr. Thompson, a seasoned scoutmaster with years of experience under his belt. His calm demeanor and steady voice reassured even the most nervous members of the troop. He carried a map tucked into his pocket but rarely needed it. He knew these woods like the back of his hand. Behind him trailed 12 boys, ranging in age from 12 to 16, each carrying backpacks stuffed with supplies they had carefully packed that morning. Some carried tents, others food, and a few proudly lugged tools like hatchets and flashlights, eager to prove themselves capable outdoorsmen. As they reached a clearing near a gently flowing river, Mr. Thompson called for a halt. "This looks like a good spot," he announced, pointing to the flat ground surrounded by towering trees. The boys cheered, dropping their heavy packs with audible sighs of relief. Within minutes, the area transformed into a flurry of activity. Tents sprang up like mushrooms after rain, some wobbly and crooked, others standing tall thanks to practiced hands. A small fire pit was dug out, stones arranged neatly around it, and soon flames licked at the dry wood, sending sparks spiraling upward. Darkness fell quickly in the forest, wrapping everything in shadows. By the light of the campfire, the boys gathered close, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows until they turned golden brown, or charred black for those less patient. Ethan, one of the older scouts, entertained everyone with tales of past camping trips, exaggerating details just enough to make his friends laugh. Jake, quieter but equally observant, sat slightly apart, listening intently while occasionally glancing toward the edge of the clearing. Something about the deep woods unsettled him tonight, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Despite the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie of the group, an unspoken tension lingered in the air. It wasn't fear exactly, but more, like anticipation, a shared sense that this trip might hold surprises beyond the usual challenges of setting up tents or finding firewood. The forest seemed alive around them, whispering secrets through rustling leaves and distant animal calls. Every snap of a twig or hoot of an owl drew startled glances, followed by nervous laughter when nothing appeared. Mr. Thompson noticed the unease but said nothing. Instead, he reminded the boys of their responsibilities, keeping the fire going, staying within sight of camp, and taking turns keeping watch overnight. "You never know what you'll encounter out here," he said with a wink, only half joking. The younger scouts exchanged wide-eyed looks, imagining bears or wolves lurking nearby. But no one voiced their worries aloud. After all, they were Boy Scouts, trained to handle anything nature threw their way. As the night wore on, the stars emerged one by one, dotting the sky like tiny diamonds scattered across velvet. The boys began drifting off to their tents, exhausted from the day's hike and preparations. 2 volunteers stayed behind for the first watch, Ethan and Jake. Armed with flashlights and a promise to keep each other awake, they settled near the fire, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the ground. For a while, the silence was peaceful, broken only by the crackle of burning logs and the occasional chirp of crickets. But then, faint noises drifted through the trees, soft whimpers, barely audible over the hum of the forest. At first, Ethan thought it was his imagination, maybe the wind playing tricks on him, but when the sound came again, louder this time, both boys froze. Their hearts raced as they locked eyes, silently asking the same question. What was that? Curiosity outweighed caution, and without speaking, they grabbed their flashlights and stepped cautiously into the darkness, leaving the safety of the firelight behind. Little did they know, this decision would change everything for better or worse. The forest was eerily quiet as Ethan and Jake stepped away from the comforting glow of the campfire. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath their boots and the occasional rustle of branches swaying in the cool night breeze. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, creating shaky beams of light that danced across the trees. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself was pressing down on them, urging them to turn back. But they couldn't ignore the strange noises anymore. They had to know what was out there. At first, the whimpers sounded distant, almost like an injured animal crying for help. Ethan paused, holding up a hand to signal Jake to stop. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the forest. Jake nodded, his eyes wide with both curiosity and unease. They stood still for a moment, listening intently. The sound came again. Closer this time, unmistakably human. It wasn't the growl of a predator or the scurry of small creatures. It was soft, broken, and filled with fear. "Should we check it out?" Jake asked, gripping his flashlight tighter. His knuckles were white, betraying his nerves. Ethan hesitated, glancing back toward the campsite. The firelight was a faint orange flicker now, swallowed by the thick curtain of trees. He knew they should tell Mr. Thompson about this, but something inside him pushed him forward. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? "Let's just see where it's coming from," Ethan replied finally, his voice steadier than he felt. "But stay close, okay?" With that, the two boys moved deeper into the woods, their footsteps cautious and deliberate. Every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally in the corners of their vision, and every snap of a twig made them jump. The forest felt alive, watching them with unseen eyes. The air grew colder as they ventured farther from the warmth of the fire, and the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on their shoulders. After what felt like an eternity, the whimpers grew louder, more distinct. They were close now, so close that Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Jake's breathing quickened, matching the rhythm of his own. Then, they saw it. A small clearing bathed in pale moonlight. In the center, huddled under a low-hanging tree, was a figure so tiny it almost blended into the darkness. Ethan raised his flashlight, its beam trembling slightly as it illuminated the scene before them. A boy no older than 6 or 7 sat curled up against the base of the tree. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Clutched tightly in his arms was a tattered stuffed bear, its fur matted and one eye missing. His wide, frightened eyes locked onto the boys, and for a moment no one moved. "Hey," Ethan said softly, crouching down to appear less intimidating. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer right away. He stared at them, his lips trembling as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he whispered 4 chilling words. "They're coming. For me." Jake's breath caught in his throat, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The simplicity of the statement hit them like a punch to the gut. Who was coming? And why? Before they could ask anything else, the boy buried his face in his hands, shaking violently. It was clear he was terrified, not just of being lost in the woods, but of something far worse. Ethan glanced at Jake, who looked just as stunned as he felt. "We need to get him back to camp," Ethan said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. Jake nodded, stepping closer to the boy. Together they tried to coax him to his feet, speaking gently and offering reassuring smiles. At first, the boy resisted, clinging to the tree as if it were his only lifeline, but eventually hunger, exhaustion, and fear won out, and he allowed them to lead him back toward the campsite. As they retraced their steps, the forest seemed even darker, more oppressive than before. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, felt like a warning. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following them. Jake walked close behind, shining his flashlight into the shadows, trying to shake the feeling that they weren't alone. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing, the boy had stopped crying, though his grip on the stuffed bear remained tight. The warm glow of the campfire was a welcome sight, but neither Ethan nor Jake felt any relief. They had found the boy, yes, but his cryptic words lingered in their minds, heavy with unspoken danger. Whatever was coming, they knew one thing, for certain. Their camping trip had just taken a turn they never could have imagined. When Ethan and Jake emerged from the woods with the frightened boy in tow, the entire campsite fell silent. The other scouts, who had been settling into their tents or quietly chatting by the fire, turned to stare at the unexpected trio. At first, no one moved. The contrast between the cheerful warmth of the campfire and the haunted look on the boy's face was jarring. He clung to Ethan's hand like a lifeline, his small frame trembling despite the blanket Jake draped over his shoulders. Mr. Thompson was the first to react. Rising from his seat near the fire, he approached cautiously, his expression calm but alert. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. Ethan quickly explained how they'd heard strange noises and followed them to find the boy huddled under a tree. As he spoke, the other scouts gathered around, their faces etched with curiosity and unease. The boy remained silent, his wide eyes darting nervously from face to face. When Mr. Thompson knelt beside him and gently introduced himself, the boy flinched but didn't pull away. "It's okay," Mr. Thompson said softly, his tone reassuring. "You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" For a long moment the boy hesitated, clutching his tattered stuffed bear even tighter. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he mumbled something that sounded like, "Liam." It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the tension slightly. One of the younger scouts, eager to help, fetched a bottle of water and handed it to Liam. He accepted it hesitantly, taking small sips before wrapping his arms around himself again. As the initial shock wore off, questions began to surface. Where had Liam come from? Why was he alone in the woods? And what did he mean when he said, "They're coming for me"? The scouts exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to press him for answers or give him space. Sensing their hesitation, Mr. Thompson took charge. "Let's focus on getting him comfortable first," he instructed. "We can figure out the rest later." The group sprang into action, doing everything they could to make Liam feel safe. Someone brought over a sleeping bag, while another scout rummaged through the food supplies to find something simple for him to eat. Despite their efforts, Liam remained distant, his gaze fixed on the trees beyond the firelight. Every time the wind rustled the leaves or a branch snapped in the distance, his body tensed as if bracing for something terrible. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Liam's presence had changed the atmosphere of the campsite entirely. Earlier, the forest had seemed wild yet harmless, a place of adventure and discovery. Now, it felt ominous, like a living thing hiding secrets just out of sight. He kept replaying those 4 haunting words in his mind. "They're coming for me." Who were they? What had Liam been running from? And why did it feel like danger was still lurking nearby? Jake voiced what everyone else was thinking. "Do you think we should call someone?" he asked quietly, glancing at Mr. Thompson. "Like, I don't know, the police or park rangers?" Mr. Thompson frowned, considering the suggestion. "We're pretty far from cell service," he admitted. "Even if we could get a signal, it would take hours for anyone to reach us out here." He paused, looking at Liam thoughtfully. "But you're right. We can't ignore this. We'll need to decide what to do once we have more information." While the adults debated, some of the younger scouts tried to engage Liam in conversation. They asked about his bear, pointing out its missing eye and joking that it must have been in some epic battles. For a brief moment, a flicker of a smile crossed Liam's face, but it vanished almost instantly. Then, without warning, he leaned close to Ethan and whispered urgently, "They'll find us. We can't stay here." Ethan froze, his stomach twisting into knots. "Who will find us?" he asked gently, trying not to sound alarmed. But Liam only shook his head, retreating back into silence. Whatever, or whoever, he was afraid of, it was clear he didn't trust them enough to explain further. The mood around the campfire grew somber as reality set in. This wasn't just a lost child they'd stumbled upon. This was something bigger, something darker. The scouts glanced nervously at the shadow surrounding their campsite, imagining unseen figures watching them from the trees. No one suggested going back to sleep. Instead, they stayed close to the fire, keeping watch over Liam and each other. As the night stretched on, Ethan found himself staring into the flames, replaying every detail of the evening in his mind. Something told him this was only the beginning, that whatever had driven Liam into the woods wouldn't stop until it found him again. And now, whether they liked it or not, the Boy Scouts were caught in the middle of it. The campfire crackled softly, its golden light casting flickering shadows on the faces of the scouts. Despite the warmth it provided, a chill lingered in the air, not from the cool night breeze, but from the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. Liam sat huddled in the sleeping bag, his eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing where the forest loomed dark and impenetrable. Every now and then, he would glance nervously at the trees, as if expecting something, or someone, to step out of the shadows. Around the fire, the scouts whispered among themselves, their voices low but urgent. Some argued that they should leave immediately, hiking back to civilization while they still could. "We can't just sit here waiting for whatever's out there to show up," one boy insisted, his hands gesturing wildly. Others countered that it was too dangerous to move through unfamiliar terrain in the dead of night, especially with Liam in such a fragile state. "If we get lost or hurt, we'll be worse off than we are now," another scout reasoned, his tone cautious but firm. Ethan listened to both sides, torn between logic and instinct. He wanted to believe they were safe, that Liam's fears were exaggerated or misunderstood. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of dread that had settled in his chest since hearing those 4 haunting words, "They're coming for me." Whatever Liam was running from, it felt real, and closer than any of them cared to admit. Mr. Thompson stood quietly by the fire, observing the group with a thoughtful expression. When the debate grew heated, he raised a hand to silence them. "Listen," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I know this is scary, and I understand why you're worried, but panicking won't help us make good decisions." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Here's what we're going to do. We stay put until sunrise. We'll keep the fire burning bright, take shifts keeping watch, and make sure Liam stays safe. As soon as it's light enough to see, we'll pack up and head straight for help." His plan didn't completely ease everyone's nerves, but it gave them a sense of direction, a concrete course of action to focus on instead of spiraling into fear. The scouts nodded reluctantly, accepting the decision even if they weren't entirely convinced. Ethan volunteered to take the first watch alongside Jake, knowing neither of them would be able to sleep anyway. Mr. Thompson agreed, reminding them to stay alert and stick close to the campsite. As the others settled into their tents or curled up near the fire, Ethan and Jake positioned themselves on opposite sides of the clearing, flashlights in hand. They scanned the tree line continuously, their ears tuned to every rustle and creak. For a while nothing happened, just the usual sounds of the forest settling into nighttime rhythms. Crickets chirped, leaves swayed, and the river murmured faintly in the distance. It almost felt normal, peaceful even, but then, subtle changes began to creep in. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it an unnatural chill. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, shifting unpredictably despite the steady glow of the fire. Ethan caught glimpses of movement in the corner of his vision, quick flashes that vanished when he turned to look directly at them. Jake noticed it too, gripping his flashlight tighter as he called out, "Did you see that?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Probably just animals," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Both boys knew better than to dismiss their instincts entirely. Something wasn't right. Back near the fire, Liam remained awake, his small frame tense beneath the blanket. He hadn't spoken much since arriving at the campsite, but his sharp intake of breath drew Ethan's attention. Following Liam's gaze, Ethan spotted a pair of glowing eyes reflecting in the darkness beyond the trees. His heart skipped a beat as he shone his flashlight toward the spot, revealing nothing more than a cluster of bushes swaying gently in the wind. Still, the unease lingered. Ethan and Jake exchanged worried glances, silently agreeing not to mention the eyes to the others. They didn't need to cause unnecessary panic, especially with Liam already so frightened. Instead, they tightened their grip on their flashsticks and stayed vigilant, determined to protect the group no matter what. Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching endlessly under the weight of anticipation. By the time the horizon began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, exhaustion had taken its toll on the scouts. Their faces were pale, marked by sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. Yet, as sunlight filtered through the trees, bringing the forest back to life, A spark of hope ignited within them. Help was finally within reach, they just had to hold on a little longer. For now the darkness receded, replaced by the promise of daylight. But as Ethan glanced once more, as dawn broke, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, the forest began to stir with life. Birds chirped cheerfully, their songs echoing through the trees, and the river glistened under the morning sun. To anyone unfamiliar with the events of the night before, it would have seemed like a peaceful, ordinary morning. But for the Boy Scouts, the calm exterior of the woods masked an underlying tension that refused to fade. Ethan and Jake had been on watch all night. Their bodies heavy with exhaustion, but their minds wired from adrenaline. Every shadow, every sound had kept them on edge. Now, as sunlight filtered into the clearing, they allowed themselves a moment of relief. But only a brief one. The memory of glowing eyes in the darkness lingered in Ethan's mind, and Liam's constant vigilance reminded them all that danger might still be lurking nearby. The rest of the group slowly emerged from their tents, groggy, but alert. Mr. Thompson wasted no time getting everyone organized. "We need to move quickly," he said, his tone firm but reassuring. "Pack up everything we can carry and leave anything non-essential behind. Our priority is reaching help and keeping Liam safe." The scouts sprang into action, folding tents, gathering supplies, and extinguishing the remains of the campfire. Despite their fatigue, there was a sense of purpose driving them forward. They worked together seamlessly, each boy contributing what he could. Even Liam, though visibly shaken, helped by holding onto a flashlight and staying close to Ethan, who had taken it upon himself to look after him. But as they prepared to leave, strange things began happening again. A distant rustling in the bushes made several boys freeze mid-task. When they turned to investigate, nothing was there, just leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the underbrush. Everyone exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether it was an animal or something else entirely. Jake tightened his grip on a sturdy stick he'd picked up earlier, using it as a makeshift weapon. "Maybe we should hurry," he muttered to Ethan, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Ethan nodded, scanning the tree line nervously. He didn't want to alarm the others, but he couldn't ignore the growing unease gnawing at him. Liam tugged on Ethan's sleeve, his small hand trembling. "They're here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His wide eyes darted toward the forest, filled with terror. Ethan knelt down to meet his gaze. "Who's here, Liam?" he asked gently, though his heart raced. Liam shook his head, unable to answer, tears welling up in his eyes. Before anyone could react further, a loud snap echoed through the clearing, a branch breaking under weight far heavier than any animal's. All movement stopped as the scouts turned toward the source of the noise. From the shadows stepped two figures, their faces obscured by hoods pulled low over their heads. They moved silently, deliberately, exuding an aura of menace that sent chills down everyone's spines. One of the figures spoke, their voice cold and commanding. "Give us the boy." A collective gasp rippled through the group. No one needed to ask who the boy was. All eyes turned to Liam, who clung desperately to Ethan. Fear gripped the scouts, but so did determination. These strangers hadn't counted on one thing: the unity and courage of a team bound by shared experiences and trust. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, positioning himself between the intruders and the boys. "You're not taking him," he said firmly, his stance unwavering despite the obvious threat. Behind him, the scouts formed a protective circle around Liam, standing shoulder to shoulder. Some held sticks or tools, ready to defend themselves, if necessary. Others simply stood tall, refusing to back down. For a tense moment, no one moved. The figures hesitated, seemingly surprised by the resistance. Then, without warning, one of them lunged forward, attempting to push past Mr. Thompson. Chaos erupted as the scouts reacted instinctively, working together to fend off the attackers. Ethan shielded Liam with his body while Jake swung his stick at one of the figures, forcing them to retreat momentarily. Though outnumbered and outmatched, the boys fought back with everything they had, using teamwork, quick thinking, and sheer willpower to hold their ground. Each boy played a role, whether it was shouting to distract the intruders, throwing rocks, or forming a barrier to protect Liam. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting someone who couldn't protect himself. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, realizing they were losing the advantage, the figures retreated into the woods, disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. Silence fell over the clearing once more, broken only by the sound of ragged breathing and the occasional sniffle from Liam. No one spoke right away. The reality of what had just happened sank in slowly, leaving the scouts shaken but resolute. They had faced fear head-on, and won. But as they caught their breath and regrouped, one question remained. How long would this reprieve? The adrenaline that had fueled the scouts during the confrontation began to ebb away, leaving behind a mix of exhaustion and unease. The forest, once alive with morning sounds, now felt eerily silent, as if even the birds and insects were holding their breath. Ethan knelt beside Liam, who was trembling uncontrollably, his small hands clutching the tattered bear like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, though his own voice wavered slightly. He wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure Liam or himself. Mr. Thompson quickly took charge, his calm demeanor masking the tension in his eyes. "Everyone stay close," he instructed, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "We don't know if they're truly gone or just waiting for another chance." His words sent a fresh wave of fear through the group, but they also reinforced their resolve. Whatever or whoever those figures were, they weren't dealing with ordinary threats. This was something darker, something calculated. The scouts gathered around Liam, forming a tight circle as if their sheer numbers could shield him from harm. Jake handed out makeshift weapons, sticks, rocks, anything they could use to defend themselves, and reminded everyone to keep their flashlights ready. "If they come back, we'll be ready," he said firmly, though his clenched jaw betrayed his nerves. No one argued. They all knew there was no turning back now. Liam finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. They hurt people," he murmured, his wide eyes darting nervously toward the woods. When Ethan leaned closer, encouraging him to continue, Liam hesitated before whispering fragments of his story. He talked about being taken from his home, about living in a place where rules were strict and questions weren't allowed. He mentioned men in dark clothes watching him constantly, making sure he didn't try to escape again. And then he described running until his legs burned, hiding wherever he could, terrified they would find him. Ethan listened intently, piecing together what little information Liam gave. It sounded like some kind of secretive group, maybe even a compound or camp hidden deep in the forest. Rumors of such places existed, whispered about by locals but never proven. Could this be one of them? If so, how far were these people willing to go to get Liam back? Jake shared Ethan's suspicions. "Do you think they're still out there?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the trees. Ethan glanced at the shadows stretching across the clearing. "Probably," he admitted. "But we can't let them scare us into doing nothing." With renewed determination, the scouts fortified their position. They moved deeper into the clearing, putting more distance between themselves and the dense woods. Using fallen branches and stones, they created a crude barrier around their perimeter, making it harder for anyone, or anything, to approach unnoticed. Mr. Thompson assigned pairs of boys to keep watch, rotating shifts every 15 minutes, to ensure no one grew too tired to stay alert. Despite their efforts, the atmosphere remained tense. Every snapping twig made them jump. Every shadow seemed to shift unnaturally. Even the sunlight filtering through the trees couldn't fully dispel the sense of being watched. Liam stayed glued to Ethan's side, his grip on the stuffed bear unwavering. Occasionally he'd mumble warnings under his breath. "Don't trust them," or "they always come back," sending shivers down everyone's spines. As the hours dragged on, hunger and fatigue began to take their toll. Some of the younger scouts struggled to keep their eyes open, while others paced restlessly, unable to sit still. But despite the challenges, a strange kind of camaraderie emerged among the group. They weren't just individuals anymore. They were a team, united by a shared purpose. Protecting Liam had become more than a responsibility. It was a mission. Finally, late in the afternoon, faint voices drifted through the trees. Not menacing this time, but familiar. At first, the scouts thought they were imagining things, but soon they recognized the sound. Neighbors from nearby cabins, alerted by the commotion. Earlier in the day, one of the boys had managed to send a distress signal via a weak cell phone connection before the confrontation, and help had arrived just in time. Relief washed over the group as the strangers approached, their faces friendly and concerned. And Krogram, then was a park ranger, who immediately assessed the situ. The arrival of the neighbors and the park ranger brought a wave of relief to the exhausted scouts, but it also marked the beginning of a new challenge. The strangers were friendly enough, offering water and reassurance, but their presence couldn't fully erase the lingering fear that clung to the group like a shadow. Liam, in particular, remained tense, his small frame trembling even as the ranger knelt beside him, speaking softly in an effort to calm him down. "We need to get everyone out of here," the ranger said, glancing toward the dense woods with a wary expression. "This area isn't safe, not with whoever was following you still out there." His words sent a fresh ripple of unease through the group, but no one argued. They had already seen firsthand how dangerous this part of the forest could be, and staying longer felt like tempting fate. As the scouts prepared to leave, they noticed subtle changes in Liam's demeanor. For the first time since finding him, he seemed to relax slightly, though his grip on Ethan's hand remained firm. When one of the neighbors asked gently if he wanted to ride back with them, he shook his head vehemently, pressing closer to Ethan instead. It was clear that trust didn't come easily to him, but the bond he had formed with the scouts over the past hours was undeniable. Before they set off, the ranger handed walkie-talkies to Mr. Thompson and Jake, instructing them to stay in constant communication while they navigated back to the main trail. "We'll keep a safe distance behind you," he explained, nodding toward the group of neighbors who had volunteered to act as backup. "If anything happens, or if you see anyone suspicious, you let us know immediately." With that, the journey began. The scouts moved cautiously, sticking together in a tight formation as they retraced their steps through the winding forest paths. Ethan stayed at the center of the group, keeping Liam close by his side. Behind them, the ranger and the neighbors followed silently, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The atmosphere was tense but focused, each person hyper-aware of their surroundings. It wasn't long before the quiet was shattered. A loud crash echoed through the woods, startling everyone into stopping dead in their tracks. From the underbrush emerged 3 figures, the same hooded individuals from earlier, now joined by another. Their faces were obscured, but their intentions were clear. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand as if to signal the others to hold back. "You've made a mistake," the figure said, their voice low and menacing. "Give us the boy, and no one gets hurt." The scouts exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. They had faced these people once before and managed to fend them off, but this time the odds felt stacked against them. There were more intruders now, and the narrow path left little room to maneuver or defend themselves effectively. Still, they refused to back down. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, positioning himself between the figures and the boys. "You're not taking him," he repeated firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Behind him, the scouts tightened their formation, standing shoulder to shoulder like a human shield. Some held sticks or rocks, ready to fight if necessary. Others simply stood tall, refusing to show fear. Ethan leaned down to whisper to Liam, "Stay right here, okay? Don't move unless I tell you to." Liam nodded, clutching his bear tightly as tears welled up in his eyes. Ethan hated seeing him so scared, but there was no time to dwell on it. He turned his attention back to the standoff, determination hardening his features. For a moment, neither side moved. Then, without warning, one of the figures lunged forward, attempting to push past Mr. Thompson. Chaos erupted as the scouts reacted instinctively, using every ounce of teamwork and courage they possessed to hold their ground. Jake swung his stick at one of the attackers, forcing them to retreat momentarily, while another scout hurled a rock with surprising accuracy, striking one of the figures squarely in the chest. The confrontation was intense, but brief. Realizing they were outnumbered and losing momentum, the intruders exchanged hurried whispers before disappearing into the woods just as quickly as they had appeared. Silence fell once again, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the distant chirping of birds. Though shaken, the scouts regrouped, their spirits bolstered by their success. They hadn't just defended themselves, they had protected Liam, proving that standing together could overcome even the most daunting challenges. As they continued their trek toward safety, Ethan glanced down at Liam, who was finally beginning to calm. Whatever dangers lay ahead, one thing was certain: they would face them together. By the time the group finally emerged from the forest, the sun was beginning to set once again, casting long shadows across the dirt parking lot where several vehicles waited. The sight of open space and friendly faces brought a collective sigh of relief from the scouts, who had spent nearly 2 days in constant tension. Exhaustion hung heavy on their shoulders, but there was also an undeniable sense of triumph, a quiet pride that came from knowing they had faced something far bigger than themselves and hadn't faltered. Liam clung tightly to Ethan as paramedics approached, their expressions soft and reassuring. One of them knelt beside him, speaking gently as she examined his injuries, cuts and bruises that told only part of his story. Though he flinched at first, Liam eventually allowed her to tend to him, though his eyes never strayed far from Ethan's face. It was clear he saw the older boy as his protector now, someone who had stood by him when no one else could. As authorities arrived to take statements, pieces of Liam's story began to come together. Through careful questioning, they learned he had been taken weeks earlier from his home by members of a secretive organization operating deep in the woods. Neighbors had reported seeing strange vehicles coming and going late at night. But nothing concrete had ever surfaced until now. The intruder's sudden appearance confirmed what many locals had long suspected. Something dangerous had been hiding in plain sight all along. The news spread quickly, drawing attention not just from local law enforcement but also from national outlets eager to uncover the truth about the mysterious compound. Reporters swarmed the area, cameras flashing as they interviewed anyone willing to talk. For the scouts, however, the spotlight felt uncomfortable. They weren't heroes looking for recognition. They were simply kids who had done what needed to be done. Still, they couldn't escape the praise that followed. In the days after their rescue, the troop became local legends. Parents hugged their sons tightly, grateful for their safe return, while teachers and community leaders praised their bravery. Awards were handed out during a special ceremony held in their honor, complete with speeches and standing ovations. But for Ethan, Jake, and the others, the real reward wasn't trophies or applause. It was the knowledge that they had made a difference. Liam, too, found safety and justice. Reunited with his family, he slowly began to heal from the trauma he had endured. His parents thanked the scouts endlessly, tears streaming down their faces as they recounted how close they had come to losing hope. "You saved him," Liam's mother said, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. "You brought our boy back to us." For the scouts, life eventually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an extraordinary experience. Back at school, classmates bombarded them with questions, eager to hear every detail of their adventure. Some boys joked about writing a book or making a movie, while others preferred to keep the memories private, sharing only snippets with those closest to them. But one thing remained unchanged: the bond they shared. The trip into the woods had tested them in ways they never imagined, pushing them to their limits physically, mentally, and emotionally. And yet, through it all, they had relied on each other, not just as teammates, but as brothers. That connection would stay with them forever, a reminder of what true courage looked like. Months later, as autumn painted the trees in fiery shades of red and gold, the troop gathered for another camping trip. This time, though, laughter replaced unease, and the crackling firelight cast warm, comforting shadows instead of ominous ones. As Ethan sat beside Jake, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories, he glanced toward the edge of the clearing where they had first found Liam. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Jake asked quietly, following Ethan's gaze. Ethan shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe. But even if we don't, I think he'll remember us. Just like we'll remember him." And with that, they turned back to the fire, letting its glow chase away the last remnants of fear. The forest still held its secrets, its mysteries, waiting patiently for the next adventurer brave enough to uncover them. But for now, under the starlit sky, surrounded by friends, everything felt exactly as it should be, peaceful, hopeful, and alive with possibility.